everyone. My name is Melodie Jones-Poynton.
And I'm the Reverend Thomas de Vermouth.
And we are excited to walk the Sunrise Road together today.
The Sunrise Road podcast is a podcast with conversations that connect and weave hope into the fabric of our shared lives.
Thank you for joining us, and here's this week's conversation. I am so very pleased to have two wonderful folks in our community who I think are well worth knowing and should be famous. They're famous to us for sure. One is Judy Hart. She is a member of our community and has been working with us on our Justice in Action project that we're working on here as a community. And through that, I learned that she is also one of the co-founders of the Angels Theater Company, and also the executive director. Tim, you're going to have to help me out with your full. It's the executive artistic director for Angels Theater Company, who is a friend of ours and has been with us before when we were talking about This Mortal Life also. And there's a new play coming out from Angels Theater Company. So we wanted to invite them both to talk to us about hope and storytelling and matters of perspective. So welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Thank you, Melodie.
Thanks,
and Thomas.
Yeah, it's great to have you here with us today.
Yes, thank you.
It's great to think that we can share something. I really like that invitation. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think maybe a good place for the conversation to start is a love of theater and what telling a story in that visual medium of theater can do. Because I know, Tim, you wrote a recent an editorial about theater and what theater hopes to do. And it's very intriguing. And so I wonder if both of you could share a little bit about what the hope of theater is in telling a story.
Yeah, Judy, why don't you start?
Is it okay if I start? Because I nurtured this theater company for its first 30 years. And Tim's picking that up now, and he's got the next 30. So no pressure, Tim, no pressure. When we started Angels Theater Company, it was a group of people that it was really a group of women, actually, who were parents and artists, and they needed an artistic home. They needed a place. They needed some hope, actually, that we could come together and make something artistic and invite an audience to. And we were all of an age. We were all in our early 40s and mostly with children. And we started talking about how much, what it meant to come together to make a work of art. So that's not, some playwrights work alone and then they bring their work to a kind, loving, critical group of people that will give feedback. But when we started, we didn't start with playwrights. We started with people who had their own stories to share. And we actually did theater for about 10 years based on the stories that were in our theater company, which was really remarkable. So not only is hope and theater connected on a literature basis, but it's also on a very visceral human connection that people hope that they will find their like-minded people to hang out with. And then they hope that an audience will come who will listen to them and maybe leave the theater changed in some way. So there's this remarkable relationship that this art form allows people on every level of it. So from the makers to the watchers to the people who share the word after the fact, and or the anticipation of the next project. And that's actually where you started, Melodie, was that idea of we can't wait to see the next one. we hope it will be as good as our last one. So Tim, I'll stop talking, hand the baton over. So.
Well, I think all of that is exactly right. We tell stories in the theater because largely we've had the experience in the theater of seeing what the theater is capable of and seeing the connection that is made. One of the things that was in the op-ed was the word ephemeral, which is just a big word that means it's live and happens in front of a live audience. But that is transformative because it engages people personally and directly in, I would call it personally and directly in the act of hope. Hope for the characters on stage, compassion for a character that is on stage. And I think of not only, hope in connection to what we see in the theater, but I was struck by, something Judy brought up about, let's talk about this hope as in the creation and the continuation of Angels Theater Company in general. Judy's 30 years in Angels, I want to be very clear, created the space that we're able to do this right now. We don't exist without that 30 years of space creation and that 30 years of, I don't think I'm mixing my metaphors, tilling the ground or making this a place where these kinds of creative activities, not only for the theater artist, but for the audience, can exist. And I pulled several of those things out of the book that you provided on hope, is that these spaces have to be created and have to be cultivated and have to be nurtured in order to flower and succeed. And so I think what we're able to do now, or what we hope we're able to do now, is based on that work and that process and that legacy that has already been created for us.
Yeah, I think the theater is so good. I loved that chapter on proximate and aspirational purpose. And the Angels Theater Company has actually been a lesson in that, because we really had to be improvisational all the time and one step at a time, because it's kind of interesting how people come and go in this town, especially when it comes to theater people. Route 80 goes really fast in both ways. And, people come in often because they're either participating in the university or they came with their partner that's working in the university, and they stay for a short time. So you have to, as much as we always aspired to use what we could. I don't think we would have loved to have had our own theater building, but that never happened because we were in the business of nurturing people and not paying rent. So we tried. I mean, we had a couple of homes along the way, but we always wanted to pay our artists rather than paying our landlord. So I think that always gave the artists firm footing. I think they always felt that they were appreciated in a really remarkable way. When we had nothing, we still gave them something. So we always split whatever money came in, we tried to give it to artists first. So that's a great legacy too. Those are good shoulders to stand on, that kindness.
And that's still our operating procedure, our MO, if you will, is that we remain homeless. Quite honestly, through the pandemic years, we would not exist if we didn't. No. And that idea of honoring artists and making sure that we pay our artists first is still a legacy and a lesson that we take from our past, from Judy.
Yeah. 30 years of being a volunteer. So it's all there's so much hope in there. When Melodie, when you mentioned that word, and when Thomas talked about hope is ephemeral. Hope is it's like, oh, I hope that happens, but I've got to take these steps to get there. So I think theater's a great, just a great lesson in step after step after step. So it's also really helped me in the justice work too. Just chaos, dealing with people, it's chaotic. So is the theater.
Yeah. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, I do want to pick up on that editorial that you wrote, Tim, about that big word ephemeral, and I had to ask Judy what it meant, and so I'm glad.
I gave him a different definition, though.
Right. But the fact that that moment when you're in the theater, that's a unique moment, as those on stage and those in the audience, and I just recall that so vividly from the play that you did a year ago, Nancy Shank's This Mortal Life, when I was just absolutely devastated in the end because Dietrich Bonhoeffer died again. And I was offended by that because I was hoping that this time there might be a different outcome. And there's something that happens there as being part of that moment that you are really. You write in the article about das Mitleid, das Mitfühlen, the compassion, the identification with the characters, and that something happens within us there. And as I was reading Marianne McKibben Dana's book on hope, I always sense a little bit of like there's like hope against hope, that you hope that maybe this time it will turn out differently. I had the joy to watch Hadestown on Broadway last fall, and that is a great musical based on the myth, and that's kind of the theme in there. That in the beginning they tell you it's a tragedy, it's going to turn out terrible, but we sing the song anyways, and that kind of that movement to do it anyways. I find that so powerful because we need that imagination to envision a different outcome.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The definition I like of Mitleid is to suffer with, because to your point, we go in knowing that Dietrich Bonhoeffer is going to die, but being able to suffer with him gives us the hope that it could turn out differently. And that's why we walk through that journey. And there is something that, in the book too, I read about the mixing of hope and joy. And there is, tragedy is strange because tragedy at some level elicits joy. And that's always been a conception back to Aristotle of why does this happen? Why do we watch someone else's suffering and feel joy about that? And I think you're able to see the hope within that story, and that's a way that we can experience what's happening with the story. Let me give you a kind of different example. The play that we're going to produce here coming up is a true story. It's a story of a individual's life, Meg Crane, who invented the home pregnancy test. And there are some absolutely heartbreaking moments that will involve a lot of judgment. Because when the pregnancy test was created in the late 60s and even through its approval process in the early 70s, it was not seen as, oh, this is something that women can do for themselves. It was seen as, this is something certain women want to do for very personal and immoral reasons, i.e. single women who are taking a pregnancy test for whatever reason. Or a line from the play is, the only reason a woman could possibly want to know if she's pregnant is so that she can get an abortion. So fascinating statements, but statements that were absolutely said at the time. The magic of the theater, there's a particular scene in this play where a woman is talking about why she needs the pregnancy test to Meg. And I won't spoil the scene completely, but her motives are her motives will be judged by people in the audience. But what I'm encouraged by and what I'm fascinated by that the theater can deliver is that whether you agree with her or disagree with her or trust her motives or find her motives lacking, you do have to engage with her and you have to hear her story.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have midlight. You have to be able to suffer with this woman in her choice. And whether this gives you more strength in your conviction or whether it changes your conviction, that's not really my purpose. My purpose is that you have to encounter her and see her on her own terms, understand her story. Then I think you can go away and believe what you will believe, but you will hear from her. And I think that that's really the strength is seeing the person, seeing the suffering or the hope that person has, and then being able to take that journey along. It is a unique aspect. I've been involved with the theater for 30 years of my adult life, and actually a lot of those years trail back to, people may not know this, some of those early years in the theater I spent with Judy. Judy was actually one of my teachers early on at the university. So that journey that I've been on, that's what's fascinated me most about the theater and about its connection to a community, is that we tell stories that have to matter to the community. That's why we're telling this story in February. That's why we told the story of Bonhoeffer last March. If you look back at the history of Angels, that's why many of the productions that Judy mounted in the first 30 years were told, because they matter to this community.
And often losing the ring in the river was a fairly recent one also, that people would come up afterwards and say, well, that's not necessarily the topic of the play, but that's my family on stage. How did you know? How did you know my family, and how did they get on stage? So they see themselves in the challenge that the characters on stage have to solve. So that's that remarkable exchange that happens. And for actors, it's different every night. So the outcome is always the same, but the process is ephemeral in the sense that if somebody sneezes in the audience at a different point than they did last night, and people start to laugh, it changes the dynamic of how the next part of the play is received. If it was a very tense moment and somebody sneezes, everybody goes, oh, and then we start again. So, yeah.
I think it's really interesting that one of the things that I hear both of you saying, and Judy, when you were talking about how it started, is the importance of sharing our stories in spaces where they are heard and where they have an opportunity to be presented in such a way so that they are authentic, but without necessarily eliciting, like going after a certain reaction. So like, this is something that happened. We're all going to have different reactions to it. I mean, we have different reactions to everything. As a preacher, I stood in the pulpit on Sunday and I talked about things in the headline that were uncomfortable to me, knowing that every single person in our congregation was going to have a different reaction to the headlines, because that's part of who we are. But I think the ability and the awareness that we need to share what is happening in our lives and maybe have some conversation. One of the things Marianne talks about, and one of the things that we are hopefully talking about here is that matter of perspective. And maybe it's just so simple as saying, I've heard your story now, so I understand your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's taken me out of my own understanding of what needs to be, because I have sympathized with this story. I felt connected to this story, and it's not where I thought it would go. I mean, I agree with Thomas. When Bonhoeffer died last year, like I was really angry, but I'm also a historian, and I'm angry. I remember reading Lincoln's, Doris Kearns Goodwin's book on Lincoln, and I was in tears at the end because Lincoln gets shot. And everybody was making fun of me, but it's like when you're engaged in that story and you're sort of having a chance to live it alongside somebody, it draws you in and sort of breaks down, for me, hopefully breaks down barriers and my understanding, and a revolution, an apocalypse, if you will, that I maybe wouldn't have known otherwise.
I'm going to try to connect something you just said, because I think it's interesting, and with no disrespect to film, we all love films, right? But there's something different in, let me pick on Titanic. We all went to see Titanic knowing that the Titanic sinks at the end. And we may have been emotional at watching that movie. But I don't think that, at least for me, I expected or thought that there was any hope that the Titanic would make it through the iceberg.
Mm.
And yet, when I watch a play, when I see someone on stage, like you were mentioning earlier, there's a possibility that Dietrich lives. There's a possibility. And I don't know what to say to describe that feeling, but there's a more personal connection, a greater sense of hope that we can impact the outcome. And I think that has to do with the difference in the art forms and the way that we interact with the art forms. But I don't have the language yet to describe how that happens.
You do mention in your article, and we're gonna link your article on the bottom of the show notes here. You do mention the observation that people in an audience share the heartbeat or share the breath, and that there's something synchronizing in that moment. That happens not in the same way in a movie theater even, and even less, of course, now with streaming and asynchronous and those kind of things. There's something really that kind of like tunes us into each other that happens particularly in the theater.
Yeah, we experience theater in a community. We sometimes experience film in a community, but not often. And I think there's some artistic reasons for that. But yeah, it's I shared that. I was talking with a colleague about that idea, and that's a study from the UK that started. I can't imagine putting heart monitors on people when they walk into a theater and that kind of thing. But apparently that's how they did this research. But that also happens with people you agree with. They will find that your breathing and your heart rate start to sync up, and even your eye movements, your blinking. Like if you are in agreement with somebody, your blinking will synchronize.
This is going to change the way I have meetings. I'm going to be looking at people's eyes. Like, are you blinking when I'm blinking?
I think it doesn't work when you look for it, Melody.
But there's something, there's a community aspect of that I do think is really important.
There's another layer. This doesn't relate directly to where we are in the conversation, but I didn't want to forget it. Sometimes artists leave their best work in the rehearsal hall, because sometimes it's the discovery of how to deal with that moment that happens in the rehearsal hall, and we never see that discovery again on stage. But that's an electrical thing that I know Tim has experienced. I'm sure everybody has experienced it in one way or another. You just can't go back and get that first jolt. Most people only go to the theater, they see something once. So they're left with that visceral response when something was either the way they thought it was going to be or some surprise happened. But artists feel it at so many different times. It's not always in front of an audience. So, which just fills that whole experience up with all the ghosts that are all those moments, that you found along the way that the audience doesn't know that, but the artists do. The artists say, every time I get to this word, I smell something that is very interesting. Why did that happen that way? So I'm a total visceral artist, as much as Tim and I talk about it all the time. He is such a thinker and such an intellect, and I got none of that. So it accumulates, and sometimes I look good because it accumulated along the way. But I'm all about the physical response that either an actor has or an artist or an audience has. And sometimes it's so visceral you can't move at the end of a performance. And I think we experienced this with the Bonhoeffer play. It's that it's that moment when it didn't change, and you just think, oh, I have to go out into the world and have my life without it changing. So
when the bad guy took that painting, I'm still mad about that. I can't believe he took the painting. Do you think that there's hope in every story?
Oh, it's a great question. I do. And I do not necessarily from the characters of the stories point of view, but because of why we tell the story and what the story tells us about life. This what I like about this book, Hope, is it's really a collection of stories. And it's a collection of stories that don't always work out. But the stories are always very instructive, not only for the author, but for us too, as we read them. And so I do think that there's something that we take from every story.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And sometimes it isn't the content of the story, but it's the agreement that somebody's listening to you. So I think that being heard, somebody listening is our hope. If everybody's talking in this world, there's not much hope. But if some of us are listening to retell that story from our own point of view, I think there's so much hope in that. I mean, that's history. I mean, that's how do you retell something that has happened a long time ago in a way that matters to us now? That's storytelling. We could read it alone, then it stays in our head. But if we read it and retell it, I think that's humanity. I think that's what my mom said I should do, is listen to her. So, it's those early lessons that we learned as children.
The Judy, what you just said there about the community too, as I think about the salon reading series, you started that a long time ago. Just the act of reading a play in front of a group of people changes the way that story is told. And this, it's something easy and low stakes to do, but something that can have such a power. And, I've even heard people who come to the salon reading say they enjoy those events more than they enjoy full productions, because there's something so visceral and distilled about that experience.
And dangerous, there's a little danger there.
Dangerous how?
Something unusual might happen, like a dog might come into the room, or or somebody drops their wine, or or the whole music stand topples, and we have to wait till everybody puts everything back together again. So it's not perfect; it's imperfect.
The perfect is not a goal there, right?
Right.
No.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Because in our business, in a sense, we are a part of every week trying to do some of the same things that we've been talking about, sharing a perspective. And I'm sitting here sort of wondering, like, I wonder if they did that test that heart test in a church, if people would come together, as their hearts might start to beat on the same rhythm, and wondering just what that does with the unpredictable, because in my experience, tragedy happens all the time, and we've been talking a lot about hope, obviously, but hope is most present in those times. I mean, I think about the times that somebody had a physical emergency in the middle of worship, and the hope of the people coming together and praying, or, like when we carry that story together, what does the hope become? And it's not always where we thought it would be, with Dietrich Bonhoeffer not really dying and that guy leaving the painting. He took the painting. Still angry, but
if it helps, that painting hangs in Nancy's house now.
I thought you were going to say it's right behind me. Yeah.
We gifted the painting to Nancy at the end of the show, and she was very excited.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I do want to thank you so much for agreeing to share with us your perspective on the theater. And I realize that for the purposes of our podcast and of our exploration of hope, I do want to say in particular, there is something special about the theater and the medium of the theater that we love.
Can you just give us a quick plug about Predictor? When is it happening? How do people get to see it?
Yeah, certainly. So Predictor opens February the 10th at the Johnny Carson Theater at the Lead Center for Performing Arts. And you can get tickets at the Lead Center website. And it is the world premiere of this particular play. And what's more exciting is that this play is going to be presented at 3 theaters throughout the country this year, different productions. But so after it leaves Lincoln, it will play. It opens May 4th in Indianapolis, and then it opens at the end of June in Sacramento, California. So this is a play that is going to go across the nation, and Lincoln gets to see it first.
Very cool. To follow up, have there been any other productions of This Mortal Life also?
Not yet, but not yet. We may have some more news on that soon.
All right. Well, we hope that you will let us know and share with us. And we are so appreciative of the work of Angels Theater Company and the thought-provoking that you do for us as a community. And a special shout out to one of our favorite actors, Mason Gustafson, who apparently is not the nice guy in this play. But I don't know more than that.
He plays a variety of characters. Some of them are lots of fun, and one of them has the potential to make people very angry.
I'm going to have to remember that the next time he comes to church. Yes. It's just a play. It's just a play. Well, again, thank you so much for spending time with us today. And I think that's it for the Sunrise Road today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sunrise Road podcast. Our podcast is hosted by me, Thomas Timmermuth.
And me, Melodie Jones-Poynton. And it is edited by Vince Rule.
The Sunrise Road podcast is a ministry of Eastridge Presbyterian Church. Please like and subscribe and leave a review.